Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time of Death. I'm one of your hosts, Ris.
And I'm your other host, and I'm treading very lightly tonight.
Why is that?
I don't know, Riss. Why don't you answer that question?
I'm trying to, get this podcast in tip-top shape. I'm trying to straighten it out, okay?
Riss!
Anyway, moving on. If you are new here, welcome. We are two nurses that love to talk true crime. And we like to focus on cases that have a heavy medical influence to them, or cases that feature a medical professional as the perpetrator or the victim. So buckle up, because this is our first ever two-parter.
For our 1-year anniversary.
And our 1-year anniversary is August 10th. Wow. Isn't that crazy? Happy anniversary, Dee.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary, Riss.
Thank you. And happy anniversary to all of our loyal listeners.
Yes.
We love you.
We do love you.
And thank you all for your continued support. It really does mean a lot to us.
Yes, and I'm still scared, Riss. Riss, you just gave me the freaking death glare!
I'm editing that out. Baba, chill.
How are you going to tell him to chill and you're not chill?
Here's a little warning. This case does involve gruesome murder details and discussion of sexual assault. This will be our first part to our two-part special. One of the major suspects in this case is a physician who we will be talking about in part 2. So stay tuned. This one really, we do talk a lot of medical jargon, I guess, about details involving the body. So let's get into it, Dee, shall we?
We shall.
Okay, I'm really actually very excited for this case because it's a very popular case. It remains unsolved to this day. It occurred in the 40s, and it is the Black Dahlia case.
Oh my God. Don't roll your eyeballs at me.
Might be. Okay. At 10 a.m. on the morning of January 15th, 1947, Betty Bursinger and her daughter left the house for a morning stroll around their neighborhood in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. So they went outside to go run some errands, and they were passing a vacant lot when Betty saw something out of the corner of her eye. After initially thinking it was a mannequin, which I feel like people usually do when they see a dead body, the horror set in as she realized it was a mutilated, naked corpse of a woman. The body was colorless, severed cleanly in half or bisected above the waist, and it seemed to have been posed by whoever laid it there. The body belonged to a Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short, who was only 22 years old at the time of her murder.
This was on American Horror Story too.
I think she was a character on there. I didn't see it, but when I was researching this, I found that out. Mm-hmm. There was a movie about the Black Dahlia.
It's a book.
Yeah. Actually, fun fact, there was also, well, not fun, but here's a fact. There was a movie made in the 40s called The Blue Dahlia, and that partially was what gave her her nickname, the Black Dahlia.
The inspiration behind it.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into why they called her that.
What's the Blue Dahlia about? Blue is my favorite color. And dahlias are beautiful flowers. Wasn't it like a term for a woman in that time?
I think the Blue Dahlia was actually like about a murder case, if I'm not mistaken. Like the movie was about a murder case.
Well, that's interesting.
Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th, 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts, to Cleo Alvin Short Jr. and Phoebe May Sawyer. The two had 5 daughters, and Elizabeth was born smack dab in the middle, so she was the third oldest, and they lived outside of Boston in Medford, Massachusetts.
I've been to Medford.
Have you? Mm-hmm. It's a small town? Or a small city?
I think that's where Tufts is.
Oh, is it where Tufts is?
I think so. Yeah, Tufts is in Medford.
When the stock market crashed in 1929, the Shorts lost most of their savings. And in 1930, Betty was only 6 years old, and her dad Cleo's car was actually found on the Charlestown Bridge with no trace of him in sight. So because of this, they assume, okay, he must have jumped off the bridge into the Charles River in a suicide attempt.
That tracks.
And of course, he's the breadwinner of the family, and Phoebe had been a housewife up to this point, but she accepts that her husband has died, to the best possible way that she could have probably, and started working as a bookkeeper to support herself and her children.
Did they say why he committed suicide?
We'll get into it.
Oh.
Elizabeth had some health issues throughout her childhood, so she had really bad asthma. And she even had to be hospitalized for it. And she would have really bad asthma attacks growing up. When she was only 15, she had to undergo lung surgery, actually. And after that, she was advised by her doctor that she should be relocating during the cold months to a warmer climate. Wow. Luckily, Phoebe, of course, she made it work and was able to send Elizabeth to friends who lived in Miami, Florida, from ages 15 to 18. So Betty is now 18 years old. She's absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. Green
eggs and ham.
Green hair, green eyes, dark brown hair. She was stylish. She wore black clothing a lot. She always wore a flower in her hair. She was very lively, and she was just bursting to get out of Medford, Mass. And fulfill her dream of becoming a star.
Are you describing me?
Yes, basically. Everything changed when in 1942, Phoebe got a letter from her dead husband.
What?
I'm alive and well in Vallejo, California. Sorry I faked my death and left you to raise our kids absolutely alone.
I bet you had another family.
Betty and Cleo start talking, and in hopes of becoming an actress and also to get to know her dad better, in December 1942, Elizabeth moves to California where she would stay with her estranged father. And they made a deal before she got there that Betty would work to keep the house tidy so that she wouldn't have to pay rent. This didn't last long, and the two started arguing. Elizabeth moved out less than a month after she moved in. So they just did not vibe.
Wow.
They did not vibe.
We are on the same vibe.
We vibe, but they didn't.
Clearly not.
So she ends up working at a base exchange, which is basically like a store or trade post type area at Camp Cook in Lompoc, California. She also meets an Air Force officer around this time and moves in briefly with him. He was abusive to her, so she didn't stay there for very long. She ends up moving to Santa Barbara during the summertime-ish in 1943. After not very long of living there, in September 1943, she was arrested for underage drinking and was sent back to her mother in Boston. Shortly after she returned to Boston, she left for Florida. She's like, I'm not into it. I'm going to go to Florida. And in December 1943, she started working at a deli. On New Year's Eve in 1944, Betty met an Air Force officer named Matthew Gordon. He ended up injured in a plane crash in India, but he survived, and he ends up proposing to Elizabeth in a letter. Elizabeth excitedly accepted the proposal and was ready for her new life with Matthew, but unfortunately Matthew ended up dying on August 10th, 1945 in another crash.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's terrible.
It's just so sad. Like, her life could have been so different. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. Like, one change in your life and it's just like derails what you thought was going to happen. In July of 1946, Elizabeth moves to Long Beach in Los Angeles, and she begins working as a waitress, and she also rents a room behind a nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. Boulevard. Around this time, she hung out a lot at a soda shop, and this is when she earned her nickname, the Black Dahlia. So that film I was talking about, The Blue Dahlia, was released in April 1946. And the people who hung around the soda shop were like, oh, you know what? Here's a good nickname for her. They called her the Black Dahlia because she wore dark clothing and she arranged her hair in a very like pretty flower-like way. She hopped from apartment to apartment. She would couch surf. She would rent with other women to reduce costs. So she kind of just hopped around in her living space. And on January 1947, Elizabeth meets a man named Robert or Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman, and the two start corresponding.
Red flag.
Elizabeth's current place was sleeping at Dorothy and Elvira French's house in San Diego. So she asks Red if he would pick her up and bring her to Los Angeles. I want to go back. I don't want to be in San Diego anymore. On January 8th, Red picks her up and they begin their drive. They stayed overnight one night at a motel and arrived in Los Angeles the next day. Red drives her to the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles because she said that her sister was traveling in to see her that day, which is probably not true. I think it may have been more like okay, I'm kind of done with this for now. I'm like,
it was an out.
Just get me to the hotel, please. Red lingered with her there in the hotel lobby for a bit, and then finally he left. Some staff members said that Elizabeth was using the phone in the lobby and then was seen at the Crown Grill cocktail lounge, which was within walking distance of the hotel. Other people say they saw her get into a car at the Biltmore, but either way, that's the last known whereabouts for her. No one saw her alive after that day. Fast forward to her body being found that January 15th morning. She was lying face up, naked, and the lower half of her body was separated by about a foot from the upper half. So like her body was, no one can see me do this, but her body was laying here. There's a little bit of space, and then her legs were laying about a foot away from her upper body.
That's so bizarre. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre, but the spacing element, I wonder what the significance is.
It's really odd. They have her posed in a weird way too. She was posed with her hands above her head and her elbows were bent at 90-degree angles and her legs were spread apart.
So it's like an overtly sexual, very graphic.
I don't think they were spread wide open. I think I saw a picture and it was maybe her feet were about a foot and a half apart to me. Her body had been drained of blood, so that's why her skin was so white. It looked to be freshly washed with gasoline to remove any prints from the body. You know, lividity, how the way someone dies, their blood will pool to the
surface on the bottom where the body's resting.
Yeah, to the surface of where the body is resting. So if she died on her back, the blood would pool towards the bottom half of her body, her back, her buttocks, even in her legs, she would have some pooling probably. Whereas if she died on her front, she would have pooling in the front of her body. And she had pooling in the front of her body. So because she was found face up, they're saying, okay, she must have been moved. There also was no blood found at the scene. Mm-hmm. I saw in a report that there was a cement bag filled with blood in it nearby the body, but there was no mess besides that bag of blood, which you would assume there would be if she died at that site. Her mouth and face had been slashed to form the Glasgow smile, which, if you don't know, it's the Joker smile. There were areas on her thighs and breasts with flesh being cleanly sliced off. Below her butt was an organized pile of her organs. So, her organs were in a neat little bundle beneath her butt.
How does that... So they were resting in between her legs then?
I think she was lying on top of the organs. Her butt was on top of the organs. Nearby her body was a heel print on the ground next to some tire tracks. The estimated time of death was 9 hours prior to it being discovered. The next day, the medical examiner began the autopsy, which unveiled some startling discoveries. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck. There were superficial lacerations to her right breast, right forearm, left upper extremity, and her left chest. She had deep cuts across her forehead. The Glasgow smile was about 3 inches on the right side of her mouth and about 2.5 inches on the left side of her mouth. There was bruising apparent on the front and right side of her head from traumatic injury, and she also had a small subarachnoid bleed on the right side of her brain.
So she had some kind of head trauma.
Yeah, definitely. There was a 4.25-inch gaping vertical laceration from her belly button down to like above her pubis. On her right hip was this is kind of interesting actually. Her right hip showed a game of tic-tac-toe like cut into her skin. Her anal canal was dilated, which suggests that there was likely sexual assault. Samples were negative for any evidence of sperm present, but of course that doesn't mean that sexual assault didn't occur. Her body, like I said, had been severed in half after her death, so this was done post-mortem. It was noted that it was done post-mortem because she had very mild bruising at the incision site, versus if it was done while she was alive, there would have been much more significant bruising. The severing of her body was done in like a certain medical technique that was actually taught to medical doctors in the 1930s. It was called a hemicorporectomy. Her spine had been cut transversely or horizontally, so like straight across, like from hip to hip, between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. The cause of death by the ME was ruled hemorrhage from the lacerations to her face and trauma to the head and face. Due to Elizabeth's underage drinking charge a few years prior, police were able to quickly identify her by using her fingerprints. The Los Angeles Examiner reporters called Phoebe short, under the guise, this is so messed up, under the guise that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. And they wanted personal information about Elizabeth. Who was she as a person? Who was this winner of the beauty contest? Can you tell us about her? Phoebe excitedly tells them all about her daughter. And then finally, the reporters admitted the truth. She had been brutally murdered.
That's just unbelievably cruel.
Isn't that just terrible? Both the LA Examiner and another newspaper, the Herald Express, heavily sensationalized her murder. And they kind of painted her as a very salacious woman. They said that she was wearing a tight skirt and a sheer blouse. They made it seem like she was like kind of like a femme fatale kind of character. And they labeled her the Black Dahlia, like her nickname was, and that moniker would become even more recognized than her real name. Okay, this is kind of crazy too. This case is just wild. On January 21st, someone calls the editor of the LA Examiner saying, "Hey, it was me. I killed her. I'm eventually going to turn myself in, but like, I want the police to keep digging for a little bit longer. Oh, also, just like be on the lookout. I am going to mail you some of Elizabeth's souvenirs." 3 days later, a manila envelope addressed to the LA Examiner and other LA papers using letters from newspaper clippings arrived. It contained Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photos, and various pieces of paper with names on them, as well as an address book with Mark's name on the cover. The envelope was rubbed with gasoline to remove any evidence of fingerprints.
The same MO as her body.
Yep. However, several partial fingerprints were able to be lifted off, but unfortunately they were compromised and could no longer be used when they were being transported.
Was that detail that her body had been doused in gasoline released to the public?
I have no idea. That's a good question.
Because it could indicate two things. That it really is the killer with intimate knowledge about the crime, or it's a copycat.
How would they have her stuff, though? That's what I don't understand.
I mean, someone can go into the apartment later date,
I guess.
but we don't know that they were genuine.
It could be that they knew her closely. You know, somebody who has your birth certificate and some of these documents might have a very close relationship to you. And also, I think, I'm questioning whether using gasoline to remove fingerprints is something that among criminals that might be a known tactic.
That's very true, Mom. Good point.
Is that really a way to destroy DNA?
Well, apparently it didn't work 100% because they were still able to find fingerprints. That same day, a black suede shoe and a purse were found sitting on top of a garbage can 2 miles away from the crime scene. And they were, you guessed it, rubbed with gasoline, so no fingerprints could be lifted.
The data says that using gasoline to get rid of fingerprints is not effective. With the technology today, can still be recovered. So if you're going to try to destroy fingerprints,
Don't say that.
don't use gasoline.
We're not telling you to commit any crimes, but do not use gasoline
If you do.
if you do.
If you do, it don't work. The data shows that gasoline does not get rid of fingerprints. So do with that information what you will.
On January 26th, another letter was sent to the LA Examiner. The writer didn't bother using newspaper letters this time, and instead they handwrote the following. Here it is. I'm turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger. He included the address that he'd be at on the morning of January 26th as well. So police go to the address. They're like, okay, we got our guy. He's going to turn himself in. But he didn't show up. At 1 p.m., the LA Examiner got another letter, this time back to his newspaper lettering formatting. Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified. Besides the LA Examiner, the Herald Express also got some letters from the killer, in air quotes, that also use like the newspaper clipping letters, one of which read, I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me. So police are continuing their investigation and they decide to look into Mark Hansen's possible role in the murder. Who was this owner of this address book that was mailed in to the LA Examiner? Mark Hansen actually owned a nightclub and he owned a theater and he was a friend of Elizabeth's. Elizabeth's friend and roommate, Anne, told police that Hansen had recently tried making advances on Elizabeth, but she had declined. Hansen was ultimately cleared as a suspect, but he was actually able to identify that the shoe and purse that was found on the garbage can belonged to Elizabeth. After clearing Hansen, police go on to interview 150 other potential male suspects, including a major suspect, Robert Red Manley. This is the same guy that she was dating,
Fair.
or probably dating. I don't know if they were dating or if they were acquaintances. Either way, they want to find this man because he was the last one to really interact with Elizabeth.
And wasn't he married?
He was married, yep.
Scandalous.
He passed several polygraphs, so he ultimately was cleared. Another man and friend of Elizabeth's was listed in the address book. His name was Martin Lewis. He was interviewed as well, but he actually had an alibi for that day. He was visiting his sick father-in-law in Oregon. On March 14th, a suicide note was found, and it was like stuck inside of a shoe in a pile of clothes by the edge of the beach in Venice. And the note said, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but they have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." And no one was able to find out whose clothes these belonged to or who this person was.
Sorry, Mary?
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of like red herrings in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So police are continuing as well, and they are looking for any evidence that could lead them to more info on the crime, but they were unsuccessful. They could not find anything. This case was turning cold. An LA councilman posted a $10,000 reward for anyone with any information that led to apprehension of the killer. I think it's like $140,000 today. So that's a hefty reward.
Absolutely.
For anyone with any info that could lead to apprehension of the killer. So, of course, people are swarming in. They're confessing. Most of them are quickly dismissed as false confessions, and they are charged with obstructing justice. Because of the precision of Elizabeth's injuries, police heavily suspected that a surgeon or doctor or other medical professional may have committed the murder. They actually wound up getting a warrant for a list of students in the medical program at the University of Southern California Medical School, which was nearby the crime scene, but they didn't get anything out of this.
It doesn't sound like a student to me, though, because someone who would have been able to pull this off, they're very confident, they're very experienced, they're very bold.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the letters really showcase just how inflated their ego is, very confident that they're not going to get caught. I think it's kind of a waste of time to go to students, you know?
Yeah, I think they were like, it was turning cold, and they were like, okay, what could we do?
Yeah.
What can we do right now? This is only like a few months after her death when the case is turning cold. Police blame the media heavily for probing, releasing unverified info, just wreaking havoc on this case. In 1949, a grand jury met to discuss the LAPD's efficacy as a homicide unit, not only in Elizabeth's case, but in other cases as well. So they're like, okay, you guys, I feel like you're not really doing enough. And this grand jury met, and it led to the police interviewing more people who knew about Elizabeth in other states. But that, of course, didn't go anywhere either. So meanwhile, people are still confessing, and they will continue to be confessing over the years. Initially, 60 people confessed, and today now the total is over 500 people who've confessed. And some of these people who've confessed weren't even alive yet.
Because they want to be associated with the infamy of this case.
Yeah.
That's so horrible.
Everyone is like convinced that they know who did it. It's just pretty crazy. So this is really the end of part 1. I'm going to be focusing on the suspects and more of the investigation next episode. It gets pretty tangled. This case is so complex, and it's still, of course, unsolved. So thank you all for listening to part 1, and hopefully you'll tune into next week for part 2.
Great job so far, Riss.
Thank you.
Her little face lights up when you say that.
I
Even though
love
she
praise.
is. You like what?
Praise.
I thought you were gonna say craze. That crazed look in your eye.
I love praise because you're crazy. You crazy.
I'm trying to come up with a rhyme for craze.
Just give up now. All right, everyone. The time is 1941. That is 7:41 for those of you who do not use military time. Thank you for tuning in. And happy anniversary, Dee.
Oh, happy anniversary. All right.
And Mom. Mom's been with us the whole entire time as well. So happy anniversary, Mom.
I thought the cat was rubbing my foot and it's Mom.
Weirdos.
I had my hopes very high. The little lady cat was rubbing against me.
Lady Wolf.
All right, let's call it.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.
Farewell.
Farewell.